Look, firing an employee is the worst part of any leader's job. Done poorly, it can cause a ton of damage to your team and reputational damage to the organization. But done well, it can actually make your team stronger. Hey leader, David Burkus here, organizational psychologist and author of 4 best-selling books on helping leaders and teams do their best work ever in any situation they find themselves in. And sometimes that situation is a situation where you have to, I don't want to say fire again, let's say invite them to be successful at a different organization. Share them with your competition. Promote them to customer status. Look, sometimes you gotta fire people. It's inevitable. And research suggests that the productivity gains from removing a toxic member of a team actually exceed those of adding a superstar player to the team. And that's just toxic people. Sometimes we have to add in underperformers, and sometimes it's not even about them, it's about the economy and the external environment, and we have to separate with relatively good employees. These myriad of different reasons don't make it any less awkward. And so in this episode, we're gonna talk about how to fire an employee nicely, in a way that strengthens your team, in a way that helps that employee, and in a way that causes the least reputational damage to your team and to the organization. The first tactic for firing an employee is to do it in person. And there's a strategic reason here, but more importantly, it's just the humane reason. Bad news is usually best delivered in person. Humans are social creatures. There's a myriad of communication going on beyond just what is spoken, and there's a need sometimes to look somebody in the face when you're delivering them bad news. In addition, there's a strategic thing, as I mentioned, right? You're going to want to see their nonverbal feedback. You're going to want to see their reaction. You may have to adjust your message accordingly. Now, if you can't do it in person, maybe you're in a situation where you just cannot get to where they are, maybe you're a virtual team or a hybrid team, you can still at least do it one-on-one and via video. We don't want to find ourselves in the better.com scenario of laying off hundreds of employees all at once on a webinar. If we have to go to a video call, we want it to still be one-on-one. And that means it may take more time, and especially in situations of layoffs, but the time invested is worth it. Not only is it more humane, it helps that employee process what's going on much better. The second tactic to firing an employee is to bring a third party, always. Always bring a third party. And this is one of the reasons you don't want to be on a call, like just an audio call. This is the reason if you can't be in person, you want to be on a video call. But this is also why even in an in-person scenario, you want to bring a third party. This is an uncomfortable and emotion-driven conversation. And so that third party person can kind of serve as a form of an accountability partner to make sure that we stay on track, to make sure that all the details actually get laid out, and to make sure that it actually runs fairly smoothly. It's best if this person is someone from HR or legal, because there may even be technical questions that you can't answer, but they're better suited to answer. And probably the biggest reason to bring a third party is you're going to want a witness. You're going to want someone else there who can testify to the fact that the conversation actually did stay professional, or if it didn't, can testify to what actually happened to be your backup in case things go wrong really, really quickly. Not that they're going to, because you're going to follow the rest of the steps in this episode. The third tactic to firing an employee is to lay it all out. Put everything on the table. You want all of the details figured out ahead of time. Details like, what is their actual last day? Is it today or is it the end of the week? When is it? What's going to happen to their company technology accounts like email and other logins? What's going to happen from a health insurance scenario? What materials or resources do you need back from them? You want it all spelled out. Even better if you've got all of this available and you can hand it to them in paper or send it to them via email as you're having this conversation. This does 2 things. In addition to being sort of a guide for you for this conversation, laying it all out ahead of time also communicates the idea that this is final. Often when you get into this conversation, things can get really emotional, really fast, people can get really defensive, and they can begin to try and plea and bargain and try and get some way that you could change your mind or try and outline some reason that you're making a mistake. It's over. You already did the details ahead of time, and sending them to this person in the moment, having it all laid out, shows them that there is no convincing you to change your mind. There is no convincing senior leaders of this decision. It's final, and we better move forward. Part of moving forward is the 4th tactic to firing an employee, and that is to offer help. if applicable. If this isn't a with cause firing, if this is a layoff, if this is some other unforeseen circumstances, if you still have a positive relationship or want to have a positive relationship with this employee, then this is the time to outline what help is available. This help comes in two forms, right? There is the organization's help. Are there outplacement services available? Is there a severance package available that they need? But this is also personal help that you're willing to provide as a leader. Are you willing to be a reference on LinkedIn or on somebody's CV or resume? Are you willing to make a couple introductions and help them find a new place to land? Now, you want this figured out ahead of time. You want to know ahead of time what you're willing to do, but you also want to lay it out here because I'll be honest, that other person, they're not thinking right most of the time. This is a crazy conversation. And so it'll be a couple days, weeks, or even months before they start to put together that plan for what their next gig is, and they realize that they could really use your help. But after those days and weeks and months pass by, it's really awkward to go back and ask for it. So the humane thing to do is to offer it out ahead of time. Let them know ahead of time what you're willing to do. That way they know and remember. That way they also don't come back a couple weeks later and ask for something you're unwilling to do. You've already offered your help. The fifth tactic to firing an employee is to be available afterwards, right? I don't know where this started, but for a long time in corporate America, there was this tendency to lay people off on a Friday, usually between like 3 and 5 o'clock, right? To minimize awkwardness, etc. The problem with that is that it can really speed through this conversation, and you can find yourself in one of two scenarios. Either that person wants to take a longer time to be with you and process what's going on, and they need you to provide some emotional support, or you have to go from a really uncomfortable conversation right into another meeting, maybe even in another firing, right? So that's uncomfortable too. You want to give yourself some time. Don't schedule anything for at least an hour after this conversation is supposed to happen. For one thing, if the conversation takes longer than needed, you are going to be grateful that you have that extra time to be able to give to that person. And if it doesn't, and if it's fast, you're going to be grateful that you have some time to process and decompress from the emotions that you were experiencing in that conversation. So either way, block off some time afterwards so that you can be available or at least be buffered from what else you have to do in the rest of that day. And the sixth tactic for firing an employee is to go tell the team after the conversation, after your buffer time, we need to tell the rest of the team what's going on. It does not take long for a rumor mill to start spreading, especially for significant events like what just happened. So you are not going to waste any time having that conversation with the team. At the same time, you're not going to want to go into that conversation without a plan as well. A plan to address what happened, why it happened, and how we're moving forward in the future. One thing to keep in mind as you're building this plan is that while you may have a ton of positive people on your team, high performers that you want to keep members of your team, know that every single person listening to you conduct this conversation is going to be listening for what you say about that other person. And they're going to be thinking about whether or not you would say the same thing about them if they left or if you were in a situation where you had to fire or lay them off. So keep this respectful, keep this professional, and keep it on plan. And the final tactic for firing an employee after you've had the conversation, with your team, is to forgive yourself. Look, this sucks. There's no other way around it, right? You're probably going to misstate something. You're probably going to forget, leave some detail out. This conversation is not going to go perfect. And so forgive yourself of that. You're going to learn from that as well. As we often say, failure is feedback, but hopefully this is not something you have to do that often, and hence don't fail at all that often. It's okay to not be good at firing people. In fact, if you were good at firing people, that says something totally different about your leadership ability, because you're not a pro. Nobody is, and that's okay. What matters is that you did your best, to the best of your ability, to keep it professional, to keep it humane, and to keep it productive. Now look, these steps can't guarantee that someone's not going to go on Glassdoor or some other employment review website and leave a bunch of scathing things, or that they're going to trash you to existing customers or previous ex-coworkers, etc. You can't control what they're going to do. What you can do is mitigate the level to which emotions can steer this conversation awry, and keep it on track, and keep it professional, and keep it productive. You'll be amazed how much they feel like there's a little bit of breathing room on the team now that potentially toxic member of the team or low producing social loafing member of the team is not a member of the team. And even if it's a situation where it's not a with cause firing, where it's a situation like a layoff, there will still be a little bit of a fresh air, a little bit of breathing room, because we know what the plan moving forward is. And that'll help the team emotionally adjust to what's going on, and that'll help put the team back on a path to being able to do their best work ever. Oh, and one more thing. Firing should always be a last resort. Sometimes you may want to fire an employee just because they're being difficult, but there's a lot more you can do to turn a difficult employee into a productive one. To learn that, you're going to want to check out this video here on how to deal with a difficult employee. Watch this before you fire anyone.